also on YouTube. And I will get that camera set up correctly in just a second. Let me make sure I've got all of this going out. Hope everybody's having a good day. Wait a minute. Nope, I already sent to you guys. I don't want to double send anybody. I feel like weird sending to people anyways, because I feel like I'm asking for attention when I send out lives. And so it's weird to me. But I know that I have people who want me to send out lives, so I want to make sure that I get them, and then I probably end up just getting a lot of other people who don't want my notices as well. Hello, everybody. Sorry, I had my thing up and I was looking at that and not able to see. Oh, awesome. Totally understandable. Much love, beautiful person. Hello. Hello. Where's Corona at? I don't know where Corona is. I'm geographically challenged. It is one of my challenges in this world. Hello. Come on. Oh, I got to take that off. It's not going to work like that. I have a new setup because I no longer have my. Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you. Sorry. And I'm completely geographically challenged about the United States as well. It's not like I'm just geographically challenged about the rest of the world. I am just literally geographically challenged. That might have paused it. Sorry, I'm trying to take my phone out of my case because I thought it would work. I have a whole new setup going because I had a child move home. And so I gave up my office space for the move home. And I finally got, I don't know what I did to make that work, but that finally worked. So I've had to change up my space. So we're in the living room now with a lovely background on my couch, which is going to see you later, Star, which is going to definitely make life more comfortable for me and definitely make it easier for me to do these things at the same point of time. It does mean that I am tweaking with my setup. I don't know what I'm doing with my setup yet. All that said, we have I haven't been going live a lot lately. I did a live the other day talking about migration patterns and stuff like that because it was important at the time. And so I wanted to go ahead and talk about our evolution. Again, this is something that, has been a constant, or not a constant necessarily, but frequent topic in here. How human beings today, Homo sapien, evolved, and who we are on an evolutionary biological scale, right? Debunks what? Quazzled. That human beings evolved or anything about, I said literally nothing. So nothing that could be debunked at that point. So one of the things that we talk about frequently is the thought process of how we evolved and the science behind how we evolved. And one of the reasons that we talk about that is because of the fact that for me, I studied humanity because I wanted to know that, because I felt like I've always known that what's going on in society currently isn't healthy and it doesn't feel right. I didn't grow up within this society. I grew up both off-grid and backwoods, and then within indigenous society. And so I didn't live in this, and I could not figure out what was wrong with this. And so I started studying to find out what was wrong with this. And why we were the way we were and how we got here to be the way that we are, right? And because of that, I first went into anthropology and then went into the military and then went into medicine, which was also something I was trained at very early, and then went into anthropology and archaeology again after the military. And with that, I am here in TikTok because I believe that education should be free. I believe that it shouldn't be gatekept behind a $40,000 a year paywall. And I believe that it shouldn't be, um, I believe that we should be respecting of indigenous knowledge and histories and understandings before we are respecting of white academic knowledge and history and understanding. And so, with all of that, I want to bring knowledges that are being confirmed in, and also bring in a little bit of more of an understanding and education on stuff that we're not, right? And so, awesome sauce. I'm not sure who we have in here right now. Okay. Um, right. I don't even know what you think my theory is. Um, I don't even know what you think my theory is that you think is being debunked, but I am going to ask you to stop being rude. It is not very like why are you speaking over women like and two spirit human beings? Like why do you think that that's appropriate, especially with the things that you're trying to state, right? Like, and so anyways, with that, I come into TikTok to try and educate people. We are not given a good education within the United States. The system is rigged, and the system is rigged to make sure to keep us stupid, because as long as they can keep us stupid, they can keep us under control, right? And if you can keep me stupid and keep me under control, then you can ring me for everything I've got. It is also designed to create division and designed to maintain power in a small sector, right? So, I, having the education I have, having the background I have, having those different things, am able to or would like to bring in more education that people are not getting, right? More information that people can't, get access to. Either it's gate kept behind paywalls, or it's information that is put in such a huge, weird language that it's hard for even people with extensive degrees or extensive vocabularies to really understand. And so that's what I do in TikTok. So today in TikTok, I want to talk about some of the new understandings in the way we evolved. I will turn off comments if it gets shitty or bad. We have like 153 people in here right now. It is possible we will turn off comments for a while. If I turn off comments, I promise I will turn them on. Part of learning is being able to ask questions and to get answers. And I learn all the time from people on TikTok, from people around me, everybody interacting. I learn information, right? I hate to turn off comments. I love the interaction and the knowledge that I gain and the knowledge that other people gain, or the ability to explain things in a way that people can understand differently, all of those different things. I will, however, turn it off if it gets rude or obnoxious, just for everybody's sanity. This is a safe space. And as such, I do not deal with racism in here very well. You won't like my response. I do not deal with phobia based on gender and desire in here, and you will not like my response. If you think that something I am saying is wrong, except about my personal self and experience, because if you think you can tell me I'm wrong about that, there's something wrong with your head. Go get checked out, because that is some narcissistic main character complex BS right there. If you think that there is something that I am saying that is wrong about a theory or a scientific idea, or that kind of information, please absolutely say you're wrong about this. This says different. Don't just tell me I'm a liar. Don't just tell me I'm wrong, because you're not getting anywhere from that, right? You're not getting anything. And I'm not going to respond, because about what? I have no clue or basis to respond to. The person behind me in this image is a Kinnis and Kinnis image of Homo erectus. This is a recreation of really our earliest find of Homo erectus, right? The first find that we have of Homo erectus is this
creation. And Homo erectus is our grandfather species. I use this image because when you look at this image, you can see the humanity in this human, because Homo means human. Homo is genus and it means human. In this human behind me. And when you can see the beauty and the humanity in this human behind me, you can relate the Homo erectus species as being human. And Kinnis, where I got this image from, is a beautiful site that does recreations from ancient finds. And so this is one of their images. They I have a link of their website under the tools tab on the website in my bio. So when we are talking about Homo erectus, it's important to understand a couple of really important things, right? When we're talking about Homo erectus is the first species that we consider to be human. Again, the genus Homo is a Latin word that says human. And when you're looking at the genus, that's Homo sapien, Homo erectus. Homo is the genus. So the genus is human. Sapien, like us, means wise, right? Erectus means erect man. So what Homo man erectus means is erect man. You can take it in any way and form that you want to. I'm not going to kink shame, but this is an erect man. And because he is our first upright, fully mobile, he is also, I mean, there's other fully mobile upright men before him, but he is the first that has what we call, or what others will call, this expedient bipedalism. And this expedient bipedalism served to get Homo erectus legitimately clear across the globe, right? So, and this is where I point out that we didn't come from apes. We came from Homo erectus, who looks very much like us. Not completely, there are differences, but who looks very much like us, right? And in coming from Homo erectus, we see that Homo erectus comes onto the scene at about 2 million years ago in Africa. Now, we have models of speciation that we have understood within Western science for the last couple hundred years. Western science is a new science. Western science is kind of, it's not as good as indigenous science, and there is indigenous science across the globe, because indigenous science is science that has lasted for millennia, where Western science is science that had been eradicated within their culture for quite a period of time and then came back by copying other people's indigenous sciences, right? So within Western science, we have understood these different methods of speciation, right? When we are looking at methods of speciation, typically we think speciation happens because a portion of a community or a herd or a murder of crows, a portion of a group is isolated from the rest of their group. And when that portion of the group is isolated from the rest of their group, they start adapting to the area in which they are isolated in. And that adaptation in the area in which they are isolated in causes changes within them that eventually makes them distinct from the old group or community that they were a part of. When I was studying in school, the way that this method of speciation, which is thought to be the standard method of speciation, was explained was through a herd of deer. And it was talked about having a herd of deer going from their summer pasture to their winter pasture over a mountain pass. And every year they migrate from summer pasture to winter pasture. And one year in the middle of the migration, a rock slide happens and blocks the pass, and it puts those two different, that herd of deer in two different sides, one on the summer side and one on the winter side. And so each of those herds of deer adapt. The one that is on the summer side now faces really harsh winters. So they might get a heavier coat, or they might develop a white flash of tail for their winter. And they might adapt their eating habits to be able to eat bark on trees and peel it off a little bit better. Whereas the one who was on the winter pasture side now is probably facing hotter summers and is now probably facing the need to get rid of some of the hair. Maybe their coat gets a little bit thinner, and maybe they're in a space where they don't have a lot of food over the time, so they kind of shrink because of not having enough food, things like that. So they adapt in these different spaces. Now, unadaptation takes 100 generations. So for humans, currently, it's considered 2,500 years for unadaptation to be prominent or prevalent within society as a full adaptation, right? Like the adaptation for lighter skin takes about 2,500 years to get to its next stage, right? So when we are looking at the way that species speciate, we have long thought that this is the main method of speciation. Many people will think that it's kind of really the primary method of speciation, right? Um, and there has been, sorry, or YouTube, my camera went really weird and you are now seeing up my nose, and I apologize for that. Uh, the camera got reset up today and it's a little bit tweaky. Let me move you out. That was my hand movements. I apologize. Um, when we are looking at the methods of speciation, there's been what we call a theoretical method of speciation, and this is speciation through convergence. And speciation through convergence is the idea of many different close cousin type species coming together. And as those many different close cousin type species are coming together, they create a new species out of them. Within the last year, this theoretical method of speciation has been confirmed as the method of speciation for us and for the method of speciation from Homo erectus, who is our grandfather, right? When we look at the way that Homo erectus, I'm sorry, this is not a discussion panel type live. It shouldn't actually have that available. Let me fix that really quick. It is absolutely because it is set up differently. I don't know why. There we go. No, it's not set up. I don't know why. Okay, anyways. When we look at Homo erectus, we now believe that Homo erectus is actually speciating at around 2 million years ago from Paranthropus boisei, who we now know is the first of the tool makers, Homo habilis, who we've long called handyman, and Australopithecine. And I believe it's Australopithecine africanus, but I cannot remember which specific Australopithecine it is. So I believe it's africanus, which is Lucy, which is that time period, but I might be wrong on which species of africanus it is. I want to be totally clear about that. When we're looking at the way that Homo erectus is speciating from those three different communities or three different species, it's important to first note a little bit of actual vocabulary. Okay, so first vocabulary terms that I want to just set in people's head and make people understand is the difference between tribe and band. Tribe is a community based on genetic lineage. The Hebrew tribes base their citizenship within their community on your genetic lineage. A band is a community based on community need, not lineage. The United States is a community that is a band. Your citizenship in this community is not based on your genetic lineage. It is based on the need of the society and the need of the citizen. So when we use words like tribe to denote primitive, to denote a certain type of life way, to denote specific communities that are not solely based on genetic lineage, or to denote it as something different than the reason somebody is considered to be a citizen of their community. If we take it into any other area, we are not using the word tribe in the correct manner. Okay, so I want to make sure that vocabulary understanding is out of the way as I talk about these bands of different community or species that are living at this time that Homo erectus is speciating out of these three different species. Again, and these three different, let me pull up my website really quick and I can tell you um, which Australopithecine it is specifically. Um, my website is theinwiddaord.com. This is a place that I compile basically little links and bibliographies. This is not where you're going to get a full-on research paper, and it is not where you're going to get my full bibliographies or all of the different knowledge that I've compiled in my own brain over the course of years. It is just going to give you, and most of these articles are articles that you can access. Now, when you are pulling up articles that are not scientific journal articles, yet they are articles that you can access, they're not behind a paywall, you can go to the bottom usually of that article or look within the article and see the name of the scientist who did the study that's being quoted. And you can follow that back to the space, sorry, you can follow that back to the original scientific journal article. And if you can get past it, like if it's not kept behind a paywall, you can get more information out of it. And you might be able to get a broader understanding. These are not meant to teach you everything. They're meant to give you a basis to start your own journey of learning. I am not here to hand you information on a silver platter. I'm here to give you information so that you can start your own journey of learning because we learn better when we seek that out ourselves, right? Just so you know. So under Human Origins tab is the new DNA research modifies. And in this, it talks about how we as Homo sapiens are speciating. And I want to make sure that this is the one that has Homo erectus' speciation change in it as well. It's not. It's been like a year since I put this one up on there, so I need to make sure. And most of these got translated over from. Okay, so this is under Homo erectus actually. And it's the Genetic Literacy Project. Okay, so it is Australopithecine africanus in this article. So when we are looking at the way that we are speciating, for our Homo erectus is speciating at 2 million years ago. 2 million years ago, there are bands of ancient hominins and one species of human, habilis, or that we consider human. Though as we look at Paranthropus boisei and we understand that Paranthropus boisei is the creator of the Oldowan tool complex, we might shift our understanding of Paranthropus boisei in the coming years, just so that's understood. So Homo habilis, Australopithecine africanus, and Paranthropus boisei all living together, hunting together. And from our beginning, hominins really enjoy something that does not look like them. If you don't look like me, I'm way more likely to want to get it on with you and make babies because I like unusual things. And I like things that, are different, curious. We are curious, always curious, right? So from the beginning, we have this interchange of you don't look like me, I want to get in bed with you. And all of this interchange of that creates a new species. And this new species is Homo erectus. It creates this new species at 2 million years ago. This proves this theoretical method of speciation through convergence and shows the first species that we know of that did not speciate through one of the other methods of speciation we have thought, and very importantly, did not speciate in isolation like we thought from prior information. So as we look at the way that Homo erectus moves and the things that Homo erectus does, these become important into how we speciate. Now, when we are going with Homo erectus's history, about 2 years ago, there was a huge thing about, oh my God, there's a 1.8 million year old human tooth in Georgia. And everybody's like, oh my God, that means that Homo sapien was in Georgia. Half of them thought the US 1.8 million years ago. And I'm like, what? And I went and I looked and I'm like, oh, that's a human tooth because it's Homo erectus's tooth. And it was definitely Georgia, the country, not Georgia, the state. So in Georgia, the country, a couple of years ago, they found a human tooth. The human tooth they found was an Homo erectus tooth. Now, the tooth that they found with Homo erectus puts Homo erectus outside of its speciation in Africa at 2 million years ago into Europe like 200,000 years after its speciation, which is a relatively quick movement out of Africa. In its movement out of Africa, we see that Homo erectus literally goes across the globe with the newest evidence that we have within the last couple of years. Within the last couple of years, we have found a site within Australia that predates Homo sapien. And we have found a site within Turtle Island that predates Homo sapien. We actually have a few sites here in Turtle Island that predate Homo sapien. This is just the one that's accepted as predating Homo sapien. So we do see, and we do know absolutely of the hobbit species or Homo florensis in an island in Indonesia where you absolutely have to cross water to get to. And we absolutely know of the Homo luzonensis species that we found within the last couple of years in an island in the Philippines that you have to cross water to get to. And we've also recently found out that Neanderthals were using boats to cross water 500,000 years ago. So we've been using boats to cross water since before our species even existed. So as we see Homo erectus moving across the globe, we start to see Homo erectus entering into a speciation through isolation, like we had understood prior as a method of speciation or the method of speciation that caused Homo erectus, right? So when we see that Homo erectus is moving across the globe, and as they're moving across the globe, they are adapting to the space that they are in. And these adaptations to the space that they are in start to create different species. Again, that speciation through isolation. We have 7 that we know of that we found in the fossil record. And then we have 7 that we have seen in the DNA of modern Homo sapiens and in the DNA of Neanderthal and Denisovan. And so I'm going to go over a bit of the 7 species that we know of that speciated from Homo erectus and where we know they speciated from Homo erectus at. So the first one we all know of, it's the first one we've ever found. It was the one that changed our understanding. It came along at the same time as Darwin's theory of evolution. When it was initially found, it was thought to be a man with some disease morphology, like modern at that time man with disease morphology. And so it was passed around several times. It was found in Neanderthal, which is a valley. So Neander is the name of the Tal, which means valley. So Neanderthal is what we named this person. We named him Homo Neanderthal because he's obviously human, right? And we found him in the 1850s. Now, Homo Neanderthalis is like 600,000 years ago to like 30,000 years ago. Homo neanderthalis has an extremely broad range as a species. Homo neanderthalis actually comes out of Homo heidelbergensis, which is considered by many to be a subspecies of Homo erectus. And those who do not consider it to be a subspecies consider it to be a descendant species. So I kind of think for Neanderthal as Neanderthals as being like our cousin, and Homo heidelbergensis as being their parent, and erectus as being our shared grandparent. Okay, so we see erectus speciating into heidelbergensis and then into Neanderthal in Western Eurasia. They do this in an extremely cold environment. As they're translating into Homo heidelbergensis in this space, not necessarily the cold environment, but the cloud cover of this space means that we start to see the first alleles for light skin coming up about 9,000 years ago. This is current research within DNA and within genetics. That's how they've identified where the allele for light skin comes from and how long ago or how many generations ago it comes into the human population. And the understanding currently within the last year, maybe it was the last 2 years, is that the alleles for light skin start within Heidelbergensis Homo erectus at about 100 or about 900,000 years ago. And they start within Heidelbergensis because of adaptations to the cloud cover of Western Eurasia. We see that Neanderthal happens to be on the lighter shade of skin. I want to define for people that when we are talking in science or we're talking in thought processes like this, where we're discussing the evolution of color and the way that color tracks and moves and stuff like that, it's important to note that we're never talking light means Northwest European modern day uber white, pale, see-through skin, and dark means dark blue, black, from, the Quay people. Like, that is not what we're talking about when we're talking about the two different shades or when we're talking about lighter or darker. What we're talking about is a range of tone, right? Skin tone is based on alleles. It is not based on the genetics as much. And it is also based on the environment of the mother while she's pregnant. And because of this, we see that it is not everybody's pale or everybody's dark. It is a range of lighter or a range of darker. So we see that Neanderthal coming from Homo heidelbergensis, who has seen the start of the alleles for light skin at 900,000 years ago, speciates as a species that is in the lighter shades of skin. This does not mean that they are all extremely pale. There are several genetic genomes of dark skin within Neanderthal. You can actually, if you have Neanderthal genes, see whether or not you have the light skin allele for Neanderthal or the dark skin allele for Neanderthal. Personally, I have the dark skin allele for Neanderthal. So you can actually look at that and see that there are different shades even within Neanderthal. It is a lighter range compared to Homo erectus, still in Africa, who is on a darker range. These, of course, are about protection, adaptation to environment, and have everything to do with the world around them. Okay. So as we see Neanderthal speciating and coming into this lighter shade, we see that a couple hundred years after Neanderthal speciates, Denisovan speciates. Now, we just found out about Denisovan in 2010. Denisovan is a relatively new species. We aren't exactly sure with Denisovan. Is Denisovan a close cousin of Neanderthal? We have yet to find a Y DNA that resembles Neanderthal. Instead, all we find is a Denisovan Y DNA or a sapien Y DNA in Neanderthal. Does this mean that Denisovan and Neanderthal are just way closer than we think? Little girl, get out of that. 1 second. I have a granddogger. Hey, what are you doing? Oh, you're on my counters, aren't you? No. So we're not exactly sure with Denisovan yet. But Denisovan is speciating in, the only places that we found Denisovan themselves is in a cave in Russia. Yet their DNA, computer stop. But their DNA. The gifts from the children. Computer, stop. It's supposed to remind me I have doctor's appointments. It doesn't work that well for that. So when we look at the DNA for Denisovum that we see the DNA in Denisovans, or the Denisovan DNA that we see in modern day Homo sapiens is in the southeastern portion of Asia and the in Australia and the indigenous people of Australia, in the islands of the South Pacific, and in Turtle Island indigenous people and Abayalian indigenous people. So we see that where the DNA is, but it's completely different from where we found the bones. This is also why the other species that we know of that is recent, the Dragoman species or Homo longi, is thought to maybe be Denisovan because we have found Homo longi in China, in Long Cave in China, and yet with Homo longi, we don't have DNA from them. From the one piece of a person that we have, which is the skull cap of Homo longi, we don't have a Denisovan skull cap. And since we don't have a Denisovan skull cap and we don't have DNA from longi, we do not know if they're one and the same. But this is three other species and where we know they are so far. Those three other species being Neanderthal in Western Eurasia, Denisova in Russia and southeastern Eurasia, Australia, the islands of the South Pacific, and Longi in China, in the Long Cave in China. Now, when we see um, those first two are the only two that we actually have DNA from, Denisovan and Neanderthal. And because I did these out of order, I have to like my mind because I usually do them in order of where we found them and when we found them. So we have Neanderthal and Denisovan and Longi in China and Asia and Western Eurasia. We have found Homo naledi in Africa, and Homo naledi is in the Rising Star Caves of Africa. Now, Homo naledi is a curious species in and of itself. Homo naledi most likely comes from a combination of Homo erectus and Australopithecus africanus. The reason being is that Homo naledi shows us without any doubt that evolution is not linear. Because when we look at Homo naledi, we see a species whose L spine down, so lower body down, is the expediently bipedal body, with the exception of some curvature with the feet that eases for climbing, but the expediently bipedal body of Homo erectus. It moves across the land quickly. We see from the L spine up that the body is Australopithecine. It has the arms to move and swing in the trees and to climb, and it has a smaller brain case. But the brain case is the beautiful, fascinating thing about Homo naledi. The brain case in Homo naledi is the what we call globular lobal brain that we only see in modern Homo sapiens sapien, and we don't see this fully until 30 to 40,000 years ago. Yet Homo naledi from 335,000 years ago to 235,000 years ago has this beautiful, beautiful brain case. That globular lobal brain case, along with how we found naledi and some of the things where we found naledi, tells us that naledi was doing things like burial of the dead, cave art, and usage of fire for movement through, so like carrying fire, and ceremony. Before Homo sapien was even like a thought glimmer on their parents' eye, and before Neanderthal had started. So Homo naledi has all these extremely advanced things that we relate to being only human, only sapien, that naledi has done. Cave of Bones, or Unknown Cave of Bones on Netflix, is a really great documentary that Lee Berger put out. Lee Berger is the lead anthropologist on the Rising Star Cave. Naledi means star, so they are named for the Rising Star Cave in South Africa and Johannesburg. They were found in 2012. One of the geologists that actually found them, because they were found by geologists, one of the geologists we've actually talked to. So it's been pretty cool. And the information coming out about naledi just blows my mind every single time. We also have Homo forensis, which I briefly mentioned in talking about how erectus travels, and Homo luzonensis. Homo florensis is our hobbit species that we found in 2003. They're in an island in Indonesia. The in sorry, the Flores Island in Indonesia. This island in Indonesia is actually in the middle of what we call the Wallace Line or the Wallace Trench. This is a space that is so deep that it's always been below, like it's never been above sea level. That's the correct way. It's never been above sea level because it's so deep. As lands have, like as the sea levels have dropped, it's never been dry. And because of this, any islands in the middle of it mean that we had to cross water to get to them. It is thought that Florensis is probably their parent species was Ergaster. And of course, their grandparent, again, being Homo erectus. When we look at the next and the last species, no, not the last, the next species, which was discovered a couple of years ago, we're looking at Homo luzonensis. And Homo luzonensis is found on Luzon Island in the Philippines. And again, this is something that's below the Rabbit, I don't understand the question in the way that it's phrased. Can you rephrase that question for me, and then I will try and answer it. So when we look at Luzon Zenzas, the island of Luzon has always been below the Wallace Trench, and so it's always been a space that you had to actually cross water to get to. So Homo Luzon Zenzas and Homo florensis absolutely prove having to cross water, that they were able to cross water to get to a space. There's a couple other things that prove that we'll talk about in the next 7 species we're talking about. The last of the 7 species is within the last 6 months, they have found this species or decided that we're looking at a new species. And this species is HLD6, Holongdong Cave in China. And 6 means it's the 6th burial, the 6th person, right, that they've found. And HLD6 is an enigma so far. HLD6 may upend everything we have said for 200 years. I just want to state that. HLD6 may upend everything. We don't know yet, though. We'll find out. And it won't upend most of what I'm saying today, but it might change some of what I'm saying today within the next 6 months to a year. I'll update you if that's what it is. HLD6 is from 300,000 years ago. Okay. And if you know anything about Homo sapiens, you know 300,000 years is considered to be our earliest Homo sapien. It's from, and that's in Morocco, right? Ebel Harod in Morocco. So HLD6 is 300,000 years ago. There are features on HLD6 that are only associated with Homo sapien. And the features on HLD6 that are only associated with Homo sapien is the flat face. And you can see the start of the mental eminence that only Homo sapien has on HLD6's chin, right? They have some seriously Homo erectus things within them. We've gone over HLD6 in here, and I've gone over some of the features from the different species. They have the gap in the back between the teeth and the curve of the mandible. That gap is not seen in our species, but it is seen in many other human species, or in fact, in all other human species. We're the only species that doesn't have the gap, and they do have the gap. So there are different things that put them in this camp and put them in that camp. They're obviously a species that comes from Homo erectus or from descendants of Homo erectus. It's likely probably there's some erectus and some Neanderthal and Denisovan in there, right? Or maybe we're looking, there's a lot of questions. And I'm going to find out because it's a fascinating thought process. And like I said, it may upend a lot of things, right? So those are the 7 species that we have so far found in the fossil record that come from Homo erectus, that are our cousin species that were around during our timeline, that we've interacted with, that we've moved with, and that we have possibly come in contact with. Again, it's important to note that the only 2 species that we have gotten DNA from is Homo neanderthal and Homo denisovan. DNA is like anything else, has a half-life. And when you have a half like any chemical, like any substance, um, I haven't been on TikTok. I haven't been anywhere. I've been taking a break. And then I tried to come back in and it went weird. And I went, fuck off. I'm leaving for a minute. And then I came back. Like, hi. So, uh, so, uh, I haven't been. You haven't been missing anything. Um, sorry, YouTube as well as asking questions. So I wanted to make sure. Um, Let me recenter. I apologize. Actually, this will be a good moment to grab me another drink. So give me 2 seconds. I will be right back while I'm grabbing a drink and I will recenter to where I was at. Awesome. I was talking about where, oh, that can is going to be a serious bitch to open. I was talking about where I was talking about DNA because I was talking about how DNA degrades. So DNA, like any other substance or chemical, has what we call a half-life. And a half-life means the rate of time or the length of time it takes something to degrade by half the amount it is. So DNA, it's not that you lose the strands, it's that they shrink. But other things, what it is that you would lose the strands. So if you are, say, your half life is a day, and say your chemical has 100 strands. DNA is not my strong point. I mean, I study some of it, but because it doesn't word right for me. Um, so I'm not going to use actual things. I'm going to use examples. So say your half life is a day, and say the chains of DNA that you have are 100. And in that first 24-hour period, the DNA, the 100 strands that you have, they shrink by half. So there's 50% of them left, right? Or, half of the DNA itself left. The next day, they again shrink by half. That means that you had 50 left. Now you have 25. The next day, it again degrades by half, which means you started with 25 and now you have 12.5. The next day, it degrades by half, which means you started at 12.5. Now you have, what is it, 6.25? Math is just as bad for me, right? So when we are looking at that, what we're seeing is that the half life within DNA and the way that DNA degrades and the way that half life works, the environment has a huge impact on it. So if something is cold and dry, it will preserve DNA longer, or the body longer. If something is hot and moist, it will degrade it faster. So Flores is never going to give us DNA unless the rumors are true and Homo florensis is still alive in Indonesia, which there are. There's the PhD who has been studying florensis since florensis popped on the scene, is studying the indigenous knowledge in the area that states that florensis is still true. So if Western science can confirm that Homo florensis is actually still alive, we might actually see some DNA out of Homo florensis, right? So we are not going to get Homo florensis DNA. We're not going to get Homo luzonensis DNA. The rising star caves in Africa are not hot and dry. They're hot and wet, unfortunately. So we're also not getting Naledi's DNA. Hot and dry, it will preserve a little bit longer, but fully submerged in acidic environment or in a cold and dry environment are the best methods of preserving the human body, our DNA, right? So when we are looking at that, the reason that we only have DNA from Denisovan and Neanderthal is exactly that, and why we're most likely to only continue to have DNA from Neanderthal and Denisovan. And also tells us with the 7 ghost species, we're not quite sure yet, right? If we have found them or if we haven't found them. So, like we see just a couple of genes from Neanderthal in the Homo sapien genome across the globe. There's literally only two communities on the planet that do not have Neanderthal DNA. The Kwe people of South Africa and the Yoruba people of West Africa do not have Neanderthal DNA. They're the only two communities on the planet that do not have Neanderthal DNA. Everybody else does. Okay. And that percentage ranges from between 1% and 2% for the majority of Africa and Western Eurasia to like, I think 4 to 5% in Asians to 2 to 3%, I believe, in Australia and about 2% in Turtle Island Indigenous people, roughly on my numbers. Okay. When Yoruba instead of Yoruba, okay, I can thank you for that correction. I've always heard it the other way, but thank you for that correction. I really appreciate it. Yoruba. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's important to me to correctly pronounce things, unless they're English. I don't give a flying about English, but if it's somebody's indigenous tongue or if if it's a people's who they are, it's extremely important. So Yoruba, thank you. I appreciate that. When we look at the different, so that is where we see Neanderthal DNA. We see Denisovan DNA, the fingerprints of their DNA in people as well. We also see these other fingerprints of DNA that we do not know who they are. We haven't found their whole genome yet. We see 3 of these different species and they're distinct genes, right? So we know that they're actually 3 different species and not the same species of Homo, right? Genus Homo. We see 3 in the Yoruba population and in the Kwe population of South Africa. So they have the same 3 ghost species, but there are 3 different ghost species in those 2 communities. We call these ghost DNA because of the fact that we see the genes within us, but we haven't found the whole genome in the fossil record. So whereas like we see the genes of Neanderthal in us, we can compare those genes to the Neanderthal genome and say, oh, this gene comes from this Neanderthal gene. So since we don't have a full genome of a species to compare it to, and we don't know the name of the species that it would be, we call them ghost species because that's kind of what they are. They're a little ghost of our ancestors still within us. So we have 3 in the Yoruba population and the Kwe population, our communities within Africa. We have 1 ghost species with indigenous Australians. And you might remember earlier, I said that there is a site that predates Homo sapien in Australia that would be a Homo erectus descendant species site. Okay. And we have 1 in indigenous Turtle Islanders and indigenous Abayalians. And if you'll remember, I said that there's also a site here, or actually several, but one that has been considered completely credible that predates Homo sapien here in Turtle Island. It is the Cerruti Macedon site in San Diego, California. California, right? Again, globally or geographically challenged. So we also see, so in the article on HLD6, they discuss the 7th ghost species. I have not found yet where exactly that 7th ghost species exists. Whether or not it's in the DNA of the Neanderthals and Denisovans like the 6th ghost species is, or whether or not it's in the Asian population because we're looking at Holongdong cave in China. So if the ghost species is related to the ancient Asian people, then it would be within that population, right? So I do not know yet where the 7th ghost species is coming from. But the 6th ghost species is seen within Neanderthals and within Denisovans. So we see 5 within us, 5 that I know of so far, unless the 7th turns out, right? 5 within us. Again, there are 2 communities within Africa that do not have Neanderthal DNA. That is the Kwe population, our community of South Africa, and the Yoruba population of West Africa. It'll take me the rest of this live, but I will have it down. Yoruba population of West Africa. And those 2 communities have 3 ghost species DNA within them. We see a ghost species in indigenous Australians, and we see a ghost species in indigenous Turtle Islanders and indigenous Abiyalians. This is it goes along with all of this other evidence of showing how Homo erectus literally makes it across the globe. And as Homo erectus makes it across the globe, again, the person behind me, this beautiful ancestress, I always consider this to be, she looks like a grandmother to me, like she's just grandma to me. I think they typically, I disappeared. I did. Ha ha. I'm okay with that. Uh, they typically, yeah, I don't know what I did. There I am. Sorry, I'm weird. Technology and me do not get along. I was trying to move myself out of her face and it was not working. All right. Well, I do that sometimes. Like I'm trying to do out of her face, but not like completely where I don't know how to get me back. Right. So I love this picture. This is again recreated from the first Homo erectus that we found. Right, this beautiful recreation from Kenneth and Kenneth. And what I love about this picture again is the fact that this picture very, 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 very much shows humanity in this human being. You see mirth in these eyes. You see the compassion and love in this smile. You see the humanity within this image, and that's why that and being asked to by several different people who relate to this image and who love this image, right? So that's why I continue to use this image. So this being taken from the very first Homo erectus we found again is also important, right? This is our oldest understanding of who our ancestor is. Now, people ask me, why am I looking at this or why am I posting somebody whose skin is dark, right? In this picture, because this Homo erectus' skin would have been dark. Again, as I mentioned, the alleles for light skin only came around 900,000 years ago. And this specific Homo erectus is over 1 million years old. And so their skin would have absolutely been dark because the alleles for light skin hadn't been necessary yet. The People want to say that light skin is like a genetic or an evolutionary advantage. The thing is that our ability to adapt to a space is an evolutionary advantage. Light skin will get you killed more places on this planet than dark skin will. Light skin is really one of the last physical adaptations that we had. We got light eyes first. We got straighter hair first. And we got those things first because they were more necessary than light skin. And because light skin will kill you in more places than it will help you. Okay. We now understand that at 10,000 years ago, those in England were as dark as this picture behind me. Otzi would have been put side to side with brown men from the Middle East, and that would have absolutely been who you thought he was. Light skin is a population, like a larger percentage of the population in specific spaces only after 5,000 years ago. That's when we reach over 50% of certain populations percentage of light skin. And again, that's just over 50%. That doesn't even mean that the majority is light skinned. Well, I guess over 50%. It doesn't mean that, oh, that's the most common thing that you see, right? So when we look at that, it's very important to understand. Even in the sagas, many people within the sagas, which is only only 1,000 years ago, and in the Arctic, there are many people, including Egil in the sagas, who are described as having dark skin. So dark skin, even as recent as 1,000 years ago, was regularly seen within spaces that we consider to have been white for thousands of years. And again, the genetic advantage of humans gotten from our ancestors, Homo erectus, their ability to adapt, the ability to adapt our skin tone based on the environment that we are in when we are in our mother's bellies is the genetic advantage. It's kind of like we have a little bit of a chameleon in us, right? And in that genetic advantage, light skin itself is not an advantage. Light skin itself is actually very much a detriment. There are only certain regions of the globe that you can have light skin, go outside and not fry, right? So that is something that must always be talked about and must always be addressed because there is a lot of, weird stuff along that thought process, right? So these are the 7 cousin species that we had and the 7 ghost species, which would also be cousin species that we had, right? Hold on a second. I'm being asked to verify to continue. I don't know why. I don't know why I just got asked to verify to continue. I've never had that happen before. So so with the 7 cousin species and the 7 ghost cousin species, right, that we know of now, we can see how Homo erectus is making it across the globe. But let's talk about how we come to be and how we see Homo erectus behaving within Africa. Now, again, like I mentioned, what we currently know of our method of speciation has changed within the last year, and finds within the last 6 months may change it further. We'll find that out, within the coming months and years, right? But within the last year, we've changed our idea of how we, as humans, sapiens, speciate. Now, currently, that is still all within the continent of Africa. Currently, our oldest find of what we consider to be a Homo sapien is Jebel Harod in Jebel Harod in Morocco, in northern Africa, and it is 300,000 years old. He does not look fully Homo sapien. He's got, the chin is pretty there, not completely, but pretty there. He's got the flat face. He does have a sloped forehead like an erectus, and he's got a little bit of I think he's got a little bit of the gap. His skull is a little bit rounder than the erectus, right? That's 300,000 years ago. At 260,000 years ago, we see 2 other finds. One is in Ethiopia and one is in South Africa. And so these 2 other finds are, again, we're looking at something that has more Homo sapien features than any other features. Our current understanding so Jebel Irod was actually a redating. That had been dated to like 40,000 years ago for quite some time. And within the last couple of years, they redated it to 300,000 years ago. And then we're starting to shift the understanding, right? So the new shift to understanding is the idea of speciation through convergence. Again, as we talked about in the beginning of live, speciation through convergence was a theory until this year. This year, in proving that we speciated through convergence and in proving that Homo erectus speciated through convergence, this theory of how we evolved was, or of not even we, it was like, oh, that's a theoretical method of speciation. We've never seen that in anybody, so it doesn't exist. So this theory of evolutional process was proven to be correct within our species and within Homo erectus, right? So because Homo erectus speciates out of 3 different species converging to make a new species, I personally take that as to why Homo erectus was so genetically diverse. The reason that we call Heidelbergensis and ergaster and antecessor are why we call them different species isn't they all live together. Maybe they're different species within bands, but they all had different features, but their features weren't completely different, just slightly different, right? And their features are slightly different in bone structure. So we as scientists or Western thought process looking back have decided that that must mean that they're different species. They could all be the same, think of themselves as the same species and just be genetically diverse. We've never gotten genes from any of them. We don't have DNA from any of them. We don't know any of that. But speciation through convergence would give you a higher percentage of genetic material to work from. and it would also result in a higher divergence in your offspring, right? A genetic divergence in your offspring. So when we are looking at their speciation through convergence, we see that they leave Africa, but they also stay in Africa. Heidelbergensis, we see that we have an African Heidelbergensis and a European Heidelbergensis. We see that these different um, subgroups, different speciations. There's even what they call the African Neanderthal, or they'll call Heidelbergensis the African Neanderthal. Like there's debate on the names of who they are and where they belong to, and by all of that stuff all of the time, right? If science isn't debating something, science has failed. Science is supposed to constantly have a couple of arguments to the sides, because having a couple of arguments to the side keeps it in check. It keeps it constantly learning. It keeps it constantly discovering new things. If it didn't have that constant debate, it wouldn't be constantly checking itself to make sure it's correct and constantly learning new things, right? So science constantly goes, no, that's not it. No, that's not it. No, that, well, I think this. Well, I think that. Well, I think. So Homo erectus within Africa, by this point, has speciated into several different, we think, has become several different species, evolved into several different species. We think some of these maybe started, like Heidelbergensis may have started in Europe and then come back into Africa. There's, because we don't have genes on them, there's, questions, still questions. Our current understanding, though, is that these are all groups of people living in bands. And again, I want to explain the difference in the vocabulary between the word tribe and the word band. The word tribe means a community based on genetic lineage, like the tribes of Israel. Your citizenship within your community is based on whether or not you have the genetic lineage. A band is a community based on community need and the needs of the individual. Like the United States, citizenship is based on, do you need to live here? Do we want you to live here? Right? So, not that, the United States does any of that, right? It's just an easy way to define band. When we're looking at the groups of communities of species that we're seeing within Africa at this time, one of the defining factors that makes us question whether or not they're different species is we find them all living together. We will find 7 people in a cave collapse, and of those 7 people, you'll find 2 Homo erectus, a couple of antecessor, and a couple of ergaster, right? So you're seeing that several different, what we think of as species from our hindsight, are living in the same community. We think that they don't have genetic lineage to each other, so this is looking like it's bands, right? And again, I want to, that is supposition, right? That is something that science has decided based on their thought process and knowledge, right? So when these bands are living together, we see that roughly 3,000 years ago, the intermixing of these bands again starts to create, through this prior theoretical method of speciation, an entirely new species. And the entirely new species is us. We are completely different in many ways from other Homo species. Again, the tooth thing. So at the back of our jaw here, right, our teeth go all the way to the curve of this bone. Where is it? Unless you've had yours pulled like mine don't, right? In Homo neanderthal, Homo erectus, every other Homo species, every other primate, every other hominin, between this curve of the mandible and your back tooth is a gap. Okay. So this is one significant difference. Another significant difference is the mental eminence on our chin. We are the only species, we have no understanding of the significance of it, but we are the only species that has this mental eminence. We are also, to our knowledge, the only species so far that has a flat face, except for maybe HLD6, which we're working on understanding. So these things are things that we're not seeing in any other species. Before, all of them are having this, like Erectus has a sloping forehead, Neanderthal has a sloping forehead, right? Like they're all having the same Thank you for doing that. I couldn't figure out how to get it to work earlier. I was trying to. So they're all having the same uh, like features overall, right? Um, the other thing that we see with us that is unique, that we only see in one other species, is the fact that we have what we call mandatory midwifery. Okay. So when we're looking at that, this also goes into our skull sizes and our uh, fuck off, pelvic canal, the passage within our pelvic canal. So when we are looking at the way we ourselves are coming about in speciation, the current knowledge within the last year is that you have antecessor and heidelbergensis and erectus and ergaster all living together in bands, right? In North Africa, in Ethiopia, in South Africa, and these groups living together in bands, these communities living together in bands. I see you, you're hot. You see me, I'm hot. You don't care that some scientist 500,000 years from now thinks that we're two different species. We're going to get it on. So we create a child. We see, the start of maybe one or two children in this band that look like modern day or look like Homo sapiens, and the start of one or two children in this band that look like Homo sapiens, and the start of one or two children in this band that look like Homo sapiens, right? And when we see these children popping up in these bands, I want everybody to understand nobody's looking at this child and going, "What the fuck's wrong with you? You look different." They all look different. Nobody looks the same. Nobody gives a flying. The idea that difference matters is a colonial thought process. Okay. Keeps you in check. So when we are starting as this child that looks completely different, Pangea, as in the supercontinent that broke apart 276 million years ago, I absolutely believe in Pangea. It was a supercontinent that broke up 276 years ago. Um, it was gone by like over 270 years or something like that before the very first hominin ever came into being, right? Tribalism isn't a very good word. So, a tribe is a community based on genetic lineage. Tribalism is a bastardization of that word meant to denote primitiveness. So it doesn't actually work because all tribalism would really be is being loyal to your family, right? So uh, when we are looking at that speciation, we're seeing, a couple of sapiens here and a couple of sapiens here. There's a broad community of a bunch of people that all look different, right? So nobody gives a flying fuck that the next one looks different. And the children growing up don't look at mom and go, "Oh, you're an erectus," and dad and go, "Oh, you're an ergaster," and grandma and go, "Oh, you're a heidelbergensis." They go, "Hey, mama, what's up?" Right? They're not looking at each other as looking as different. The grandmother heidelbergensis is never going to look at her grandchild Neanderthal as being a different species, right? So, when we are looking at this, it's important to understand that within these communities and within our early development as a species, we ourselves did not look as differences as something to attack. We looked at differences as not only a norm, but a desirable norm. And that is proven as we move out across the globe and populate different areas. Because every time we come into contact with something new, we get it on with them. We have babies with them. Literally, every time we see something that does not look like us but walks on two legs and carries the same type of genitalia, we go, "Hey, honey, what's up? Want to come back to my furs?" That's literally what we do every single time. That's how we have. There is more Neanderthal DNA on the planet today than there ever was during the entire 600,000 years of Neanderthal existence because we got it on with Neanderthals. We didn't kill them off, we ensured they survived. They were a dying species who had about 10,000 members left and were completely inbred by the time we came across them. This has been proven by genetics. And this is because where they speciated from a population of Homo erectus that was isolated. So their genetic diversity wasn't high to start with. We do believe that they were large populations at least twice that shrunk down to an almost extinction event at least twice. And that the reason that they are still here today, because they are absolutely still here today, is because we intermixed with them, and thus actually saves the species, right? The same thing with Denisovan. We're looking at a species that by the time we're coming into contact with it is a small species. There's not a lot of them left. And so when we come in contact with them, us intermixing with them means that they are still here on this planet today. They still exist, right? And so it is not that we killed off these species. It is our interactions with these species that ensured the survivability of these species past what might have been an extinction for these species. No, let me go over a couple of vocabulary words because y'all got some weird thought processes on vocabulary. There are three different methods of movement into a new space: migration, immigration, and colonization. The first method of movement into a new space, migration, is when you move into a space that is unoccupied or you migrate on a yearly path with the seasons. Okay. This is space that you've already occupied and you're moving back in. It's where your winter house is and where your summer house is, right? Um, and we see this in the Pacific Northwest actually a lot, where people have winter houses that lasted hundreds and thousands of years, and they had, summer houses in different areas, right? This is migration, or moving across an unoccupied space or into an unoccupied space. This is migration. Immigration is moving into an occupied space and becoming a part of the society that exists in that occupied space. We see immigration all the time within the United States. People come to the United States, they immigrate here, they become citizens, they might even begin politicians and get a job in politics. They become a part of the society of the United States. Okay. Colonization is moving into an area that is already occupied and replacing the society with your own society, replacing the government, the religion, and the structure of the society with your own society. You usually leave people back in your own home. Maybe it's Britain, right? And you send out groups to form what are called colonies, which is where we get the word colonization from. A colony is a small outpost of a larger civilization that enforces that larger civilization's government and society over the community in an outpost, usually thousands of miles away. So these three different methods of movement into new land, again, are migration, either migrating along a yearly path or migrating into a land that has no occupying of your species or your type of species within it, right? Immigration, moving into a space, sometimes with your whole community, sometimes with a few of you, right? And in that space that is already occupied, you become a part of the society that is already there. Colonization is taking over a space and controlling them, making them take on your ideas. You always leave your space at home, and it is always an outpost. It is important to understand the definition between these words. One of the reasons I'm on here, because most of us don't seem to understand the definitions between these words. I had to learn them like everybody else, right? So as Homo sapien, and this specific, the migration pattern of Homo sapien is specifically why I had to do that, because when I learned about how Homo sapiens migrated, I went, are we just fucking colonizers? Is that just who our species is? Right. And then I went and I looked and I reread definitions, and I went over everything, and I tried to make sure, because I'm like, is that just what the fuck we are? Because I don't want to be that, like, you know, right? Um, and it is actually completely different. So most places that we migrated into were not occupied, right? There are places that we migrated into that were occupied when we got there, and then we become the immigrant in that area. Very frequently, and this is seen in archaeological evidence over and over again, we adapted to the society that was there. So if I am going to move into Europe, where the Neanderthals have speciated and been for 500,000 years, I want to get the fucking down low on how to live there, right? I want to know what plants are edible. If you know what plants are edible, it is safer for me to ask you what plants are edible than it is for me to go and test them all. How many healers do I want to lose, right? Like, it is safer for me to go, hey, where do you hunt? Than it is for me to go, I'm just going to tromp through this forest until I find a place to go, right? All of those things all of those things matter, right? So this is, we immigrate or migrated across the planet. We don't start colonizing until later. Colonizing starts, actually, the first record of colonization is the Hebrew colonization of Canaan, which is the modern day Palestinians. That is literally the first written record that we have of colonization. We do have archaeological records of takeovers, and our archaeological record of violence is only 10,000 years old, right? Violence within our species is 10,000. It is not. Okay, so the thing is words mean what words mean, period. Just because you want them to mean something different for your own personal space does not mean that they mean something different, period. Words mean what words mean until we change them. Don't get me wrong, we change shit all the time, right? Until it is changed, the word colonize means to put your outpost into an occupied territory and enforce your government and ideas while your governmental structure remains in a prior area. Period. You can Google it. I would recommend that when you Google it, you do what is, like, you look through several different explanations and not just take the first one, because that's the healthy way to do it. Google this shit, the difference between these things and the difference between the way we move. So, this method of us speciating through convergence within Africa shows that we speciate through these bands of multiple different groups, or multiple different species of humans living in community together, because nobody gave a flying fuck what your skin color was or what your nose looked like, okay? And all of these bands of people living together, all of these species and humans living in the same band, in the same group, all of this interaction creates an entirely new species. Now, I might not know that there is anybody else that looks like me on the entire fucking planet until we all get together come summer, right? Very likely we are looking at groups of people who do come together, right? Because evidence shows that the way that our species starts in these different bands and then comes together over 100,000 years is a coming together. So we solidify as a species of our own between 135,000 years ago and 125,000 years ago. This is when we go from being, just an unusual looking member of a different species to our own species. Within current, and this again is in the last year, within current understanding within paleoanthropology. The point of the picture in the back is Homo erectus. This is our grandparent. I've explained this like 5 times in the live, just to say, like, this is for a reason. So when we're looking at the way that we come into being at that time between 125,000 years ago to 135,000 years ago, there's a couple important things to note. We know that we have been living as a species, like Homo sapien, have been living in the Arabian Peninsula since 130 or 150,000 years ago. And we know that we were living there with Neanderthals from 150,000 years ago to 50,000 years ago. There are 2 caves in the Levant that are a 5-minute walk from each other, that we occupied one cave and Neanderthal occupied the other cave for over 100,000 years. We know that after 200,000 years ago, the only Y DNA that we have found in Neanderthal is actually a Homo sapien Y DNA. So we have been intermixing with Neanderthal for at least 200,000 years. So again, we solidify as a species after these actions. We are already, a group of us are already mixing with and interacting with Neanderthals up in the Arabian Peninsula, and Neanderthals already have our Y DNA as the replacement for their Y DNA, right? So when we see that, the reason that it is important to me for us to note this is because it shows that we have never at any time in our past until, and there's arguments about the timeline on it, but between 30 and 13,000 years ago, been alone on this planet. We have always looked at everybody around us as being us. We lived with them, we ate with them, we had babies with them for this entire period of time. Roughly 30,000 years ago, we see that the last of the Neanderthals is gone. There is evidence of Denisovian as recent as 13,000 years ago. We start to see the rise of violence within our species at 10,000 years ago. Prior to 10,000 years ago, we have 2,000 individuals that we have found in the fossil record. And of the 2,000 individuals that we have found in the fossil record, 2% have injuries that could possibly be attributed to violence. Now, what does could possibly be attributed to violence mean? What can possibly be attributed to violence means if I see somebody who has an injury from, say, they look like they got their head hit by a rock, right? I can't tell you whether they got their head hit by a rock that fell from a ceiling of a cave in a cave collapse, or whether or not somebody picked up a rock and went smash. I can't tell you that by looking at a stoved in head. Now, if they've got an arrow point in their head, I might be able to tell you that, right? But I can't look at a stoved in head that's been hit by a rock and tell you what or who welded the rock that injured this individual. So we have 2% injuries in 2,000 skeletons that could possibly be attributed to violence. Possibly. At 10,000 years ago, we see that not only do injuries become definitively violent, but they are definitively acts of violence, but the percentage rises to 18 to 20% at 10,000 years ago. This is around the same time that Western-based agriculture is leading us into hierarchical cities, and hierarchical cities are leading us to deal with god kings who are trying to create division and fear so that they can continue to, or they can maintain control. They can maintain their hierarchy, right? So, listen, Ugg had an accident with that arrow. Well, okay, so there is one, and I know this is like 30,000 years ago. We have a spear point in somebody's thigh. Now, the spear point in this person's thigh, from my memory, it's been like 2 years since I looked at the image, but the spear point in somebody's thigh is actually like, let me see if I can do it like this. There. The spear point is like here in their thigh, but it's facing down like this into their thigh, right? And so if I look at that, that to me denotes, actually, I think it's a flint napping accident personally, but it could denote a hunting accident, or it could seriously be somebody stabbed them, right? But the angle of it doesn't look like an intentional stab, right? Because if I'm going to intentionally stab you, it's not going to be coming from your top down, right? Like maybe they were holding their kid and their kid was like, Daddy, like it's not like one of those things that you can look at and go, oh yeah, that's right. So again, there's like in the well, okay, so prehistory, first of all, let's define what prehistory is. Prehistory adjusts across the globe. Prehistory legitimately defines itself as before writing. So anything that is prehistory just means before people were writing it down. Okay. I just want to make that definition. And that being said, well, there are many forms of writing in Turtle Island and Abiyala. That's also why prehistory here is considered pre 1492 because it wasn't Western writing and because Westerners are just like that. Colonizer is going to colonize, right? So prehistory is different in different areas. I just want to state that. That evidence of violence being very sporadic, and that's what I'm saying. There's no definitive. There are things that could possibly be attributed to violence, about 2% in the 2,000 skeletons or 2,000 individuals that we have prior to 10,000 years ago. Now, we have these numbers are changing. When we look at Denisova Cave is literally like thousands of 2-inch and less pieces of bones, right? It looks like it's weird, like the way that it is. It's just all bone fragments. So we could be ending up pulling out like 1,000 individuals out of Denisova Cave and get a whole different concept, right? We can absolutely be pulling out, a whole different thing. And violence in self-defense isn't violent. Violence in hunting isn't violent, right? If I have to kill a deer, I personally, when I hunt, I make sure that one shot, one kill, and it's quick and clean. I use everything, and I am thankful to who I, have the life that I have taken because life is cyclic. I need that. They know I need that. I make sure that they get what they need. They make, like it's a cycle. That's just how it works. That's not violence, right? Violence is I am going after somebody, right? Violence is I am physically, I mean, there are absolutely mental violence and stuff like that, but violence as evidence. Violence means that I am physically attacking you, right? So, and I am the attacker. Violence in defense is not violence. I wouldn't call that violence, right? If I have to defend myself against something, that's not me being violence, right? So I personally am of the thought process, and again, this is my personal ramblings, that the reason that we started becoming the way that we started becoming and the way that we are now is we started thinking we were it. And when we started thinking that we were it, we started thinking that we were more important, right? And that's when we started dehumanizing the planet and dehumanizing animals and dehumanizing us, right? So, um, no, we're not sneaky at all. We like to think we are the top uber predator, but we really aren't. Um, so this is the new understanding on the theory of how we evolved and how Homo erectus, and again, the person behind me is Homo erectus, okay? How we evolved and how Homo erectus evolved, and how that uh, totally changes our theories of how evolution happens. As Western science, this really proved that what had prior again been thought as a theoretical method of speciation not only happened, but happened within us and within our ancestor species, right? This is, well, actually, there is evidence that Neanderthals had dark skin. There's plenty of evidence of that. Thank you, though. Okay, so that being said, I've kind of really gone over the point of the live because the point of the live was to discuss what the new understanding of the theory of evolution or how we evolved is. I have about half an hour and then I'm going to take off. I'm going to take off about noon mine time. So what I'm going to do, that's not true. Actually, everybody in Africa has 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA, except for the Kwe population and the Yoruba population, who are who both have ghost species. I went over this a little bit earlier in the live, actually. So I've seen nothing that states first humans had light skin. In fact, everything that I've seen states that we started dark and we were dark until very, very, very recently, like within written history recently. Um, and That's because of the evolutionary advantage that comes from having dark skin. We needed the dark skin. That's an evolutionary advantage. Light skin is not an evolutionary advantage. Thank you, Nanya. Okay, so if you are just coming in, I have been going live since for like an hour and a half. It is over on YouTube. I've been co-streaming on YouTube. You can go back and watch there. I am going to go ahead and I want to let everybody know now. I'll be getting off around noon. That's about 24 minutes my time. I'll probably do a summation in about 10 minutes. I like to try and do a summation at the end. What do I mean that light skin isn't an evolutionary advantage? Absolutely. So the evolutionary advantage is the fact that we have this chameleon like ability to adapt our skin tone based on the environment that our mother is in while we're pregnant. We will either get lighter or darker. The alleles, because skin isn't based on like our skin isn't a genetic thing, like it's more of an allele thing and it's more about environmental factors. And it is this chameleon like ability that we actually get from Homo erectus that actually gives us the ability to adapt our skin tone based on the environment, again, that our mother was in when we were in the womb. That itself is the genetic advantage. Light skin is actually a detriment in 90% of the world. Light skin will actually get you killed in 90% of the world, right? And not by the asshole people, but by mama herself, right? Light skin will actually get you dead in half of the world, right? Whereas you can literally be anywhere in the world with dark skin and it's not going to, you can replace vitamin D in plants. It's easy enough. And that's why we were literally in Europe for about 35,000 years before we got light of skin, right? We got light eyes first and we got straight hair first because light skin isn't that important for vitamin D. We get vitamin D from so many other spaces, right? So we kind of did it, Tira. We have stripes and patterns on our body that we can't see. Our animals actually identify us by those stripes and patterns on our body that we can't see. They've proven that scientifically within the last couple of years too, that we literally like our entire body is covered with patterns and stripes in the skin that we just cannot see. And I think that's fucking fascinating, right? It's like, oh my God, where's my patterns at? I want to see, right? Um, so um, when we look at the genetic advantage, the evolutionary advantage is the ability to adapt our skin tone. Dark skin, we evolved with dark skin because it is the evolutionary advantage again in 90% of the planet. There's only roughly 10% of the planet that light skin is anywhere near a help in. And even then, that help isn't as important as light eyes is. We developed light eyes because light eyes are able to see in low light better than dark eyes are. If you have light eyes and you go out into the sun, it's really bright and it hurts. So dark eyes see better in a high sun content area because they help block some of the sun, whereas light eyes see better in a low light area because they absolutely are actually let more light in so you're able to see. So we adapted the light eyes first because it was an advantage for predators, right? We need to see where the predators are coming from before we need to get more vitamin D, right? What group, Woodrow? So light skin um, is seen within the people that ended up becoming the Sami at about 8,000 years ago when they migrate over from the Eurasian steppes. Again, it's not a predominant factor in their society. And it's lighter, right? Not translucent. Yeah, well, and so it's lighter. So the Scandinavian region was settled by two groups at about 9,000 years ago. And the two communities that settled it, one comes from the Eurasian steppes. They are dark of eye. Yeah, they're dark. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. They're dark of eye and they're light of skin, and or lighter of skin. And they come over from the Eurasian steppes. These are the ancestors of the Sami. of the Finn, and probably as well got some of the Greenlander Inuit ancestry within there as well. Because that Arctic group all is very intermingled. And then we see that at the same point of time, dark-skinned, light-eyed people are coming up from southern Eurasia, southern Europe, and that group becomes the modern day Swedish, Norwegians, Deutsch, stuff like that. And that group again started as very dark of skin, um, and it turned with very light eyes, and then got lighter in the environment. Yeah, this isn't Neanderthal. This is Homo erectus behind me. This is a recreation from the skull of the very first Homo erectus that we found. Um, and I like this recreation specifically because of the love and the humanity that you see in her face, right? To me, she has a lot of beautiful humanity in her face. And that's why I like this image uh, or this artist's rendition. Several artists are trying to recreate. They all, when they're doing Homo erectus, because Homo erectus, again, light skin alleles don't start until 900,000 years ago. And by that time, Homo erectus had been around for 1.1 million years, right? So most Homo erectus would have been darker skin. So when we see most Homo erectus images, they are absolutely all darker skin. Some make Homo erectus look like apes though, or like they're not human. And for me, that's why I use Kenis and Kenis, because Kenis and Kenis images is very good on making them like look human, like making them look like who they are. Homo erectus gave us fire. Homo erectus gave us the start of all the tool like so Oldowan tools again we just discovered came from Paranthropus boisei, not Homo habilis, but Homo erectus was the first to modify, adapt the adaptation, which is a uniquely human thing, right? To adapt the adaptation. And Homo erectus is the first to do that. Homo erectus gave us clothing. Homo erectus gave us our first homes. Homo erectus gave us Homo erectus moving across the earth gave us our first ships, our first boats, our first way to cross water. Homo erectus is the foundation of science. Homo erectus had science, and that science is the foundation of your phone. Homo erectus's ability to perform actual science. So, science itself is I observe in nature, I predict or hypothesize what the observation might mean. I test that prediction, right? And then if that plays out, I have a theory. If it's like a tool or something like that, I have a working thing, right? If it doesn't, then I have to go back to and retest, right? To a new hypothesis. So Homo erectus's ability to do that is what gives us the tools that we have, what gave us like the blades that we have, what gave us the ability to make points. They created the first points in their Acheulean hand axes. And it is their ability to do that, to understand how to control fire, right? That gives us the ability, the tool and the fire gives you the ability to make steel, right? To make a computer chip, right? Every single thing in your life around you, including the size of your brain, comes because Homo erectus was a scientist. Homo erectus was a brilliant scientist. And everything that you have comes from their science. Their science gave them the ability to eat food that created a higher caloric intake for a lower amount of food, which in neonates and newborns actually contributes to brain growth. So the reason that your brain is the size that your brain is because Homo erectus was a scientist who discovered how to control fire. Everything about you is based on the fact that the person behind me in this picture was a scientist who knew how to control fire. Everything about you is amazing because this scientist behind me, this amazing first human, this amazing ancestor, this amazing grandfather of every single one of us, right? This amazing ancestor, their ability to have science, their capacity for the understanding of science is what gave you everything you are and made you everything you are. And that to me is the most beautiful thing and why I have such a passion and a love for Homo erectus. Their ability to understand means that I have a brain that can understand, and and that I have a phone, and that I have everything that I have, right? Their capacity is the foundation for everything that you have. And I think that that's not understood enough, right? That's, we like to think of science as this new invention. Science is as old as the Homo genus. Science is 2 million years old, and it started before us, right? So I am going to go ahead, got 15 minutes left. Let me go ahead and wrap up here. I didn't go into a couple of things today, slightly touched on one, but I'm going to go into them really quick right now. We as a species have something called mandatory midwifery. Mandatory midwifery means that as our babies are born, because of the shape of the head and the shape of the shoulders and the shape of the pelvic outlet, which are all ovals, not circles, and the head and the shoulders are literally the size of the oval itself, right? Means that we have to turn our babies twice as they're coming out through the birth passage or the birth canal. As they're coming out through the birth canal, we have to take a quarter turn to get their head out because they start with their nose facing backwards. And then we have to take a quarter turn to get their shoulders out to pull them out. What this means, this is called mandatory midwifery. The only other species that's ever had this was Homo neanderthalis. What this means is that we must have community to birth our children. This means that biologically, we as a species are communal, okay? Since biologically, we as a species are communal, this means that we need community, right? We also have more life stages between neonate, newborn, and adult. These are stages of our brain development than any other species on the planet. And as such, our time of brain development from the moment that we are born to the time that our full brain development happens is 25 years currently. During this time period, thousands of studies have shown that we absolutely must have nurture. We did studies in the 50s that were horrific. So many studies that we've done that are horrific. They took orphans and they put them in two separate rooms. And in one room, the orphans were touched, they were loved, they were held, they were given bottles with somebody holding them, they were talked to, they were interacted with. In the other room, they propped their bottles up and changed their diapers, and that's all they did. Those who lived in the room where they got no interaction died. This is called failure to thrive. And failure to thrive happens due to a lack of nurture and interaction with the nurturers around you. Recent studies have shown that it was Neanderthal women who were larger than Neanderthal men, and they were the hunters in that community. We can see that in their bones. Recent studies have shown that for generation upon generation throughout the entirety of our history, prehistory, women were out hunting as much as men were. The thought process that we divided gender roles instead of looking at somebody's skills is idiotic, to say the best. Like it's unwillfully stupid to say the best and willfully stupid to say the worst. The thought process that we gave a shit what was between your legs when we needed somebody to hunt or flint nap or go get water is absolutely ridiculous. And there is no evidence throughout our prehistory, history, any of it. Our earliest kings were not kings, they were queens. There are 17 queen in their own right, named in the Egyptian roll of kings. Okay. The earliest members of the royal family who are like the Sumerians and the Assyrians, there were queens in there, right? In their own right, and they ruled on their own. The idea that we have binary is an extremely new, extremely like last 100 years. We were doing trans surgeries, like transitioning surgeries in the late 1800s. This is new and it's bullshit. So when we are looking at this, it's important to note that throughout history, it took everybody within a community to nurture a child from neonate to adult. I don't care what's between your legs. Can you change the diaper? Can you teach the child how to gather? Can you teach the child how to hunt? Can you feed the child? Can you interact with the child, right? This is done by the entire community. It generally takes a community of 30 people to raise one child from neonate to adult in a time prior to this. And if you look around you, it still takes a community of 30 people to raise one child from neonate to adult at minimum, because you still, even as a single parent, have to have an employer, okay, who provides you with the money that you then go and spend at the grocery store, which is a couple humans there. Then you have daycare, right? Maybe a babysitter on the side. Like there are still, you got a doctor. There are still several people that must nurture this child properly from neonate to adult. And recent studies have shown that not only does it take a village to raise a child, right, which we've all been told for years, but nobody buys, right? But recent studies have been shown within indigenous cultures that the village to raise a child method actually raises healthier and happier children. Okay. We are, as a species, nurturing and communal, and we currently live in a society that tells you love is hate and hate is love, that tells you that community is a bad thing, that you should isolate yourself, that everyone around you is the problem, that you're the problem. We currently live in a society that legitimately teaches you to, it gaslights you into believing the exact opposite, right? Like we've been taught that actions that are really mean and hateful and hurtful are loving actions. We spank our children because we love them is a perfect fucking example, right? We are taught that shitty abusive behavior is a loving behavior. And we are taught this as a society, and we've been taught this for a long fucking time. So it's pretty ingrained at this. We think as a society, for the most part, that we are all evil and we are all trying to fight against the evil within us. We are all trying to overcome our imperfections to attain some perfection that somebody else ordained for us. And it's usually a very white, very Western ideal of perfection that even people who are white and Western could never really attain, right? So if today you feel that you're the problem, or you feel depressed, or you feel anxious, or you're just having a hard time right now because you're looking around you and you're like, I don't know if I can handle this shit, I want you to know that you are having a healthy response to an unhealthy society. Depression, anxiety, knowing that there is an issue, these are healthy responses to an unhealthy society. It is society that is the issue. It is society that is the problem. You are missing your community. You are missing the nurture that you were supposed to have that you have not gotten. Today, give yourself that nurture. Give yourself that love. You're anything like most of us, there's not a lot of people in this world that take care of you, but you probably take care of every fucking other person on the planet. So today, make sure that you spread a little of that love and a little of that care to yourself. Give yourself grace, because it is very, very likely that there are very few people around you who give you grace, because we just don't give grace as a society. We think that we get to judge everybody else by what we think they are from some picture on the internet and tell them what to do and how to live their lives without any information of who they are or what they are, right? So give yourself grace today, especially if nobody has been giving you love and grace. Above all, remember that these are healthy responses to an unhealthy society. And you are not the problem. Knowing it means that you're a part of the solution. We have to be aware to fix things. If we are unaware that there's a problem, we don't fix things. Okay? So, your knowledge that something is wrong makes you worthy or makes you part of the change, makes you part of the solution. Many of us always also believe that we are unworthy. And the thing is that we have a right to life because we breathe. We are given the right to life the moment we are born. Okay. Life starts at first breath. We're given the right to life the moment we are born. The right to life includes the necessities for life. And the necessities for life include love, nurture, community. These are necessities for life, as I've just demonstrated in talking about the Failure to Thrive study. Okay. So many of us are taught that we're not worthy of these basic necessities for life, that you have to achieve something to be worthy of nurturing, of love. And that's just simply not true. You are worthy simply by breathing. Love is a necessity for life, and therefore you are worthy of love. You are worthy of being loved. You are worthy of acceptance and compassion just by being alive and breathing. Okay. So I want you to remember today that you are worthy. And those of us who are aware and are making changes up our worth, right? So the fact if you're depressed and anxious and you're thinking that there's something wrong, that ups your worth, right? Because you're contributing to the change in society that is necessary at this point, this junction that's pretty horrible, right? So remember that you are worthy and that you are necessary. And remember that you are loved. I love you. I may not know you, but I love you. I love you because you're a human fucking being and you deserve that. Now, you come at me sideways a few times. I may not like you, but I'm still going to love you because you're a human and you deserve that. I love you so much. Take care, everybody. Give yourself grace, give yourself love, give yourself compassion. And I'll be back in a couple of days. We'll see. Much love, everybody. Bye. Much love, YouTube. You guys take care. I'll be co-streaming again next time, just to make sure. And I am back up on YouTube. I also have a backup on, not YouTube, TikTok. I also have a backup on TikTok. I'll make sure there's a video about that as well. Take care, everybody.